So I bought an airport. Not a toy airport, a real one. Runways, terminals, my name on the deed. I thought I was buying a landing strip that prints money every time a plane touches down. Cars come, planes come, cash comes, simple. I was catastrophically wrong. On my very first morning, I watched a fully loaded jet touch down on my runway. I stood there mentally spending the landing fee before the wheels even stopped. Turns out that fee barely covers what it cost me to keep the lights on in that terminal for the day. Somewhere around lunchtime that same day, a single delayed flight backed up my entire schedule. 3 gates went idle, and I got a very polite but very expensive call from an airline lawyer. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why a packed runway can still lose money, where the real profit at an airport actually hides, and why one single airline can hold my entire business hostage. Before any of that, let's talk about what it actually takes to even call yourself an airport owner. This isn't a business you casually start in your garage. Beyond the runway and terminal themselves, you need air traffic control coordination, security screening infrastructure, fire and rescue services, and a small army of regulatory approvals before a single plane can legally land. Most airports of any real size aren't even owned outright by one person. They're run by public authorities, government bodies, or complex public-private partnerships, precisely because the capital and regulatory burden is so enormous. I remember sitting through my first regulatory hearing thinking, surely the landing fees make this back quickly. They did not make this back quickly. Let's start with the number that ruined my first week. I assumed landing fees were the whole business. Plane lands, I get paid, everybody's happy. Here's the real math. A fully loaded jet might weigh around 175,000 pounds. Landing fees typically run somewhere between $85 and $200 per 1,000 pounds of aircraft weight. So one landing might net me somewhere between $15,000 and $35,000. That sounds like a fortune until you remember what it costs to run a runway, a control tower, security, and a terminal. Every single day, whether 5 planes land or 50. Airline fees like this, what the industry calls aeronautical revenue, typically make up somewhere around half to 2/3 of a major airport's total revenue. But here's the part that shocked me. Airlines negotiate these rates hard, and in many cases, they're regulated. So I can't just charge whatever I want. I can't mark up a landing fee the way a restaurant marks up a steak. So if the plane itself barely covers my costs, where is the actual profit hiding? Here's the twist that saved my airport and honestly my sanity. I'm not really in the airplane business. I'm in the parking and shopping mall business that happens to have some runways attached. The stuff that isn't an airline fee, what the industry calls non-aeronautical revenue, is where the real margin lives. Take parking. Once I've built a parking garage, every additional car that parks in it costs me almost nothing extra. A single busy airport's parking structures can bring in hundreds of millions of dollars a year, almost pure profit once the concrete is paid for. Then there's the terminal itself. Every single shop, restaurant, and newsstand inside pays me rent or a cut of their sales. A busy international terminal might have over 100 retail and dining vendors, generating collectively somewhere between $100 million and $300 million a year in total concession revenue. I get a slice of every overpriced sandwich, every duty-free perfume bottle, every phone charger sold at a criminal markup. Duty-free shops alone can pay some of the highest rent per square foot of any retail space on the planet, because a captive traveler with foreign currency burning a hole in their pocket is a marketer's dream customer. Currency exchange booths are another quiet gold mine, charging fees that would get laughed out of any normal bank. I once watched a single kiosk quietly clear more profit in an afternoon than 3 of my landing fees combined. Non-aeronautical revenue like this can add up to nearly half of an airport's total income, and it comes with far better margins than the planes ever do. So somewhere around month 3, I stopped thinking of myself as an airport operator. I started thinking of myself as a landlord who happens to rent space to a very specific kind of captive customer, someone who is stuck in my building for the next 2 hours with nowhere else to go. I rearranged everything. More retail near the gates, longer walks past shops on the way to security. I became obsessed with something called dwell time, which is a fancy way of saying, how long can I keep a bored, hungry human trapped near my shops? If you've ever wondered why the walk from security to your gate mysteriously passes through a mall, now you know. That's not an accident. That's the business model. Okay, numbers aside, let's talk about the thing that actually terrifies me at 3 in the morning. Building an airport is one of the most capital-intensive things a person can possibly do. A single major terminal can cost somewhere between $3 billion and $8 billion to build. A single new runway on its own can cost another $1 billion to $2 billion. Almost nobody pays for that in cash. It gets financed with enormous amounts of debt, usually through airport bonds, and this is where it gets genuinely scary. Those bonds come with a rule called a debt service coverage ratio. In plain language, my revenue has to stay comfortably above a certain line, or I'm in breach of my loan agreement. Here's the trap. Airline landing fees are often locked in by contract and don't just go up whenever I need them to. But my non-aeronautical revenue, the parking, the shops, the restaurants, that depends entirely on how many people are walking through my terminal that month. If passenger traffic drops, my shops empty out, my parking garages empty out, and suddenly my coverage ratio can fall below what my bondholders require. That's not just an awkward conversation. That can trigger default clauses on debt worth billions of dollars. And there's an even more specific nightmare, relying too heavily on one single airline. If my airport is what's called a fortress hub for one major carrier, a huge share of my flights, my passengers, and my revenue all come from that one company. If that airline hits financial trouble, cuts routes, or goes bankrupt, I don't just lose a tenant, I lose a huge percentage of my entire business overnight. On top of that, rideshare apps have quietly been eating into one of my best revenue streams. Every passenger who gets picked up curbside instead of parking in my garage is revenue I used to count on gone. Some airports have started charging rideshare companies special pickup fees just to claw a little of that money back. And then there's the neighbors. Building or expanding a runway means dealing with noise complaints, environmental reviews, and sometimes lawsuits from entire communities living under the flight path. I once sat through an 11-hour public hearing about runway noise that accomplished absolutely nothing except making me question my life choices. A single resident with a good lawyer can delay $1 billion expansion project for years, all by himself. Every expansion plan can get tied up in these reviews for years, while the debt clock on my existing bonds keeps ticking regardless. All right, let's put some real numbers to this because the spreadsheet is where the truth actually lives. Let's say my airport handles a healthy amount of traffic and pulls in a total of $500 million a year in revenue. Aeronautical revenue, the landing fees and airline charges, makes up around 60% of that, so roughly $300 million. But because those fees are tightly regulated and negotiated, my actual margin on that $300 million is thin. Non-aeronautical revenue, parking, retail, concessions, real estate, makes up the remaining 40%, call it $200 million. But that $200 million carries a dramatically higher margin because once the infrastructure is built, serving one more customer costs me almost nothing. In a strong year with steady passenger growth, I can comfortably cover my debt payments and walk away with a healthy profit. Let's actually walk through what a strong year looks like in more detail, because it's genuinely satisfying when it happens. Passenger traffic grows steadily, my parking garages run near capacity most weeks, and my retail tenants are all reporting strong sales. My non-aeronautical revenue that year might climb to around $220 million, comfortably above the $200 million baseline. After debt payments and operating costs, I might clear somewhere around $50 to $70 million in genuine profit for the year. That's the version of this business that made me buy an airport in the first place. There's also the quieter, in-between version of this business, which is honestly the most common one. Most years aren't a triumphant boom or a full-blown crisis. Most years passenger numbers wobble a little. One retail tenant closes while another opens, and I spend most of my time just keeping the coverage ratio comfortably above the line without much drama either way. Now let's talk about a bad year, because the aviation industry hands you plenty of those. Say a major economic shock, a pandemic, a recession, or just one airline pulling out of my airport cuts my passenger traffic by a third. My landing fees drop because fewer planes are flying in and out. My parking garages and shops empty out even faster than the flights do, because non-aeronautical revenue is even more sensitive to passenger numbers. Suddenly, my revenue is nowhere near enough to comfortably cover my bond payments, and my debt service coverage ratio is in serious jeopardy. This isn't hypothetical. Regional airports around the world went through exactly this during recent global shocks, and some only survived because of emergency government support. So here's my honest advice, from someone who now checks flight delay apps the way other people check their heart rate. If you're buying an airport because you love watching planes take off, that's a lovely hobby. It is not a business plan. If you're buying an airport because you want to become genuinely excellent at running parking garages, retail leasing, and dwell time psychology, while praying no single airline ever controls too much of your traffic, you might actually be built for this. I still love standing at the window and watching a plane lift off the ground. That part of this business is genuinely magical, and it's the reason I said yes in the first place. but I stopped pretending that feeling is what keeps my bondholders happy. The parking garage keeps my bondholders happy. I bought an airport thinking I was buying the planes. What I actually bought was a shopping mall and parking empire that happens to have some very expensive runways attached, financed by debt that never sleeps. If you want to see what happens when I buy the next terrifying business, subscribe because there's always a next one.